Hello everybody, it's Lisa Tilson here with you today. I am delighted to be joining the Crafty Meraki video team, and today is my first video on their YouTube channel. So I thought I would share a technique with you that I haven't done for a little while, and it is reverse stenciling, and I'm going to show you two different ways of doing it. One with a stencil, and I'm using Party Time stencil, and the other way with a die. So I'm going to be using the Merakulous Mini Slimline Paradise for that. So let's get started with the technique. And I'm going to start by showing you the version which uses the stencil itself, but on both cards you'll need to ink blend your panel first. So for my ink blending, I've chosen to use Distress Oxides and also some Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock. It has a smoother texture than my normal go-to white cardstock, and so I do find that it really helps with the blending of the Oxide inks. And if you blend often, you'll know that Oxide inks do blend easier than Distress inks. It's to do with the properties. They are a mix of dye and pigment inks, so they do blend easier, at least in my opinion, and many others, than Distress inks. So I'm starting off by using some Mowed Lawn, and then I'm going to go in and use some Twisted Citron. I have sped this up a little bit because it does take a while to blend the whole panel. I'm doing both, or I'm doing the colours from each end, so I'm going to meet in the middle with my final colour. Now I do find when blending with this many colours, it is harder to get a smoother blend because I'm doing 5 colours, I guess, on each end of the cardstock. Because that area of ink is quite small, it does mean that it's harder to get a smoother transition in between the colours. You don't have that much room to play with, but I do go back and forth between the colours just to see if I can blend it out a little bit. But it isn't super important to have a very smooth blend for this technique. So I've added some Mermaid Lagoon in there, and I'm going back over that with the Twisted Citron. And one of the other things that I wanted to mention was with the Mermaid Lagoon, I did find it quite hard to get a good coverage, and that is because my ink pad is actually quite dry. I need to order a re-inker. I haven't used my oxides in quite a while, and so I'd forgotten that this one wasn't particularly juicy, but it will really help your blending if you've got that nice and saturated, that pad. It just makes a big difference when trying to blend between colours. So a little note to myself to go and order that. And now I'm going to go in with some Wilted Violet. So I've chosen my colours with various things in mind here. First of all, the 5 that I'm going to use will all kind of blend well with each other, or with their neighbour, I should say. So blue goes well with purple, green goes well with blue, and I'm going to use some pink in the middle, which will blend with the purple. So if I was to remake this card, you see I'm losing my blue a little bit there. It really doesn't matter at the end of the day. That's just me being super fussy about the way I want it to look. But I would probably drop one of the greens and just have 4 different colours across the panels. So as I mentioned, it's not going to matter too much, and I do go backwards and forwards again, trying to smooth this out a little bit more. And the other reason that I chose vibrant colours, well, 2 other reasons. Firstly, I think they are really good for this technique. I think vibrant, bright colours work a lot better. You could use pastels. I don't think they would have quite the same impact. I'm also a bright colour loving girl, so I often veer towards the brighter colours anyway. But because I'm using the Party Time stencil with this panel, that kind of says to me that you want something bright and fun. So whether you're creating a panel for an invitation or a birthday card, I think you can use the stencil for any of those celebrations. So that is another reason why I picked those colours. So we're almost at the end of the blending here, and I'm now just sort of faffing about between each colour, making sure that when I pick up the brush, it is the brush for the right ink. I've done that so many times, picked up the wrong brush and completely ruined a panel. So I was careful to make sure I only used the right brushes for the right ink. So there we go, that is the panel finished. And as I say, you can still see the stripes, but you're going to see how using the stencil over the top actually sort of distracts from that. So I'm just going to flip that over, and I'm going to secure the stencil from behind with some low tack tape. And I didn't use any pixie spray or anything similar on my stencil. As this stencil has quite a lot of solid areas, I did find it didn't need it. So I've just stuck that down with a little bit of tape just to hold it in place. And here is where the magic happens with this technique. I'm now going to add some black soot distress ink all the way through that stencil. I don't have a black soot oxide, so I'm using distress ink. It's absolutely fine. You can mix and match the two. I do often do that. So I'm adding a really good coverage of the black soot across the stencil. I go over bits where I think I can see a little bit of ink peeping through. I just want to make sure that I can make that as dark as possible. And at the moment it really does look like a hot mess. You're probably thinking, what is this girl doing, covering her stencil in black ink? And to be honest, it horrifies me. I don't know why. I use dark ink on my stencils all the time, but there's something about seeing all that black and I'm thinking, oh, I just need to get that clean as soon as possible. So I do have a bowl of water to the side, and I do put the stencil in there straight away. And there's the magic when you pull off the stencil and you see all that lovely detail left behind. It's the same when you remove any mask or stencil. It's always great to see the end result. So that's how it looks with the stencil. That's the first way of doing this technique. And I'm now going to show you how to do it with a die. And for that, I'm going to use the Merakulous Mini Slimline Paradise. So just removing that from the packaging. And on the left there, I've got some stamping mask paper. So I'm going to remove a sheet of that. And then I'm just going to tape that die down onto the white side of that sheet of paper. And I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine. All I'm doing here is creating a stencil out of a die. So you could do this with any of your dies. I think this is so pretty, this die, so I really wanted to use it in the video today. So now it's come out of the die cutting machine, I'm just going to pop out all those pieces. Most of them just dropped out actually. This paper that I'm using is quite thin, so they came out really easily, but I did use a pokey tool to get out the smaller pieces that are within the butterfly's wings and things. So once I've done that, we're going to secure it down over our blended panel. So I blended this panel off camera. I didn't want to make you watch two lots of blending of cardstock, but I did use oxides again, and I used prize ribbon, peacock feathers and squeezed lemonade, and I applied those randomly across that panel. The panel measures, I think it's about 6.5 by 3.5 at this point in time. I do cut it down a little bit, but I'm now going to stick that stencil down over the top. It is quite tacky, so it sticks to my fingers. So in the end, I just take a piece of paper. I'm going to place that down over the top and just run my hands over it just to make sure that that's stuck down properly. You want to make sure that you don't have anything kind of sticking up. Make sure that it's adhered properly to your panel below, obviously, before you apply the ink. Otherwise you're going to get the ink under the stencil. So I'm going to go through the same process again. I'm going to use some black soot distress ink, and I'm going to apply that through the die cut stencil. I've sped up the application of the black ink a little bit so that this video isn't too long. It does look like I'm going quite hard whilst I'm applying the black ink. I'm really not. I'm actually being quite careful because this is a paper stencil. It isn't as tough as a normal stencil, and I really want to make sure I don't rip it as I'm applying the ink. And I do go over this quite a lot because there are larger areas where I'm applying that black ink. I really want to make sure that none of the ink below is going to show through that black ink. So I do go over this quite a lot. It's oddly quite therapeutic. I'm not sure why. It is a bit of an arm workout at the same time, but it is really fun watching the kind of colour disappear, knowing what's going to happen when you pull off the mask. And just continuing on through now, I really wish I had done this with latex gloves. You do see that I use a piece of memo paper there just to kind of put that down so my fingers are not completely on the black ink, but I did end up with a lot of black ink on my fingers by the end of the day. And also you don't want to see the marks of your fingers in your blending, so just using a pokey tool here, and I'm going to peel that mask off. And again, it looks like I'm going quite quickly here because it's sped up, but I actually do this quite slowly just to make sure that I'm not ripping any of the cardstock behind. Just removing those final little bits that kept getting stuck to my fingers, and there you have it, the final panel with all that beautiful colour behind the black. So I'm going to move on now to assembling the cards. My first panel I've trimmed down a little bit. I'm just going to add some wet adhesive onto the back of that, and I'm going to map that onto a top folding A2 card base. So that is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base, and using wet adhesive always allows you to wiggle that around a little bit so that you get a nice even white edge all the way around the panel. And I'm doing the same now with the mini Slimline, adding some glue onto the back, and I'm just going to add that to a mini Slimline base. The size of the mini Slimline base card is 3 1/2 by 6 1/4 inches. So now we're going to add our sentiments. For both of them I'm using the Paper Hugs stamp set. I absolutely love these sentiments and the font, and I've created these off camera. So my first one is the With Love sentiment, and I've stamped that onto some white cardstock with VersaFine Claire Nocturne. I've added some foam tape to the back, and I'm just going to pop that down onto the panel there. The second one is Have a Beautiful Day. I thought that would go well with the kind of party feel of that card. That was white heat embossed on some black cardstock. Again, I've added some foam tape onto the back, and I'm just going to add that down into a similar position on that panel as well. I thought that it would stand out more with white on black for this card. So because it is quite vibrant, the colours, I always think it looks nice to have that pop of black and white with your sentiments. So that is the 2 cards almost finished. It was, of course, at this point that I thought I would add a few jewels onto one of the cards. I decided that the party card had enough going on, but for some reason I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle to the butterfly card. So I'm using the Enchanted Forest jewels, and I'm just adding them around my sentiment there. So I've got 3 at the bottom and 2 at the top, and I'm just going to adhere those down with some wet adhesive. And that brings us to the end of today's cards and technique. I hope that you enjoyed seeing those cards come together. Let me know in the comments if you've done this technique before, whether it's new to you, whether you're going to give it a go. It's a really great way of getting some extra uses from your stencils and dies and a completely different look as well. So thank you for joining me here today. I'll be back again next week with another video for you, and in the meantime I hope you get some time to craft. Bye for now.